Sometimes love isn't about remembering. Sometimes it's about refusing to forget. It's what 67-year-old Martha Williams proved when she stood at the Family Feud podium with trembling hands and a heart full of 40 years of shared sunrises, and gave an answer that stopped Steve Harvey's world and reminded an entire television studio that the deepest love stories aren't always the ones with happy endings. They're the ones where love endures long after everything else has faded away. The morning had started like every other morning for the past 3 years in the Williams household in Savannah, Georgia. Martha Williams rose at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm, the way she had every morning since 1987, when Frank had started working the early shift at the port. She moved quietly through their modest kitchen, her feet finding their way in the pre-dawn darkness with the muscle memory of 4 decades of the same routine. 2 scoops of Maxwell House coffee in the blue ceramic pot that had been a wedding gift, 1.5 cups of water, never more, never less. A pinch of cinnamon that Frank had loved since their honeymoon in New Orleans 42 years ago, even though he could no longer remember New Orleans, or honeymoons, or the taste of cinnamon that had once made him smile every morning when he took his first sip. Martha Williams had been making coffee for her husband Frank every morning for 40 years. Through new jobs and lost jobs, through the births of their 3 children and the marriages of those children, through Frank's parents' funerals and her own mother's long illness, through the lean years and the comfortable years, and all the ordinary years that make up a lifetime shared between 2 people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every single day. But for the past 3 years, Martha had been making coffee for a man who no longer recognized her face, who sometimes called her by his sister's name, who occasionally became frightened when he found her in their kitchen because he couldn't remember that this was their home and she was his wife. Frank Williams had Alzheimer's disease, and it had stolen almost everything that had once defined their relationship, except Martha's unwavering commitment to love him exactly as he was, not as he had been, or as she wished he could still be. The coffee routine had become sacred to Martha, not because Frank remembered it, but because it was the one thing that sometimes seemed to reach him in ways that words no longer could. When she placed the steaming mug in his hands, when the familiar aroma filled the space between them, she sometimes saw a flicker of something in his eyes that looked like recognition, like peace. Today was different from their usual routine of doctor's appointments and medication schedules. Today, Martha was preparing for something that seemed impossible just months ago, appearing on Family Feud with their daughter Susan and their 2 grandchildren, 16-year-old Emma and 18-year-old Michael. The idea had originated with Emma, who had spent countless afternoons sitting with her grandfather, reading to him even though he rarely seemed to follow the stories. Emma had noticed that Grandpa Frank seemed calmer when Family Feud was on television, that Steve Harvey's voice created a kind of comfort that penetrated his confusion. "Grandma," Emma had said one afternoon, as they watched Frank doze peacefully in his recliner, while Steve Harvey's laughter filled their living room, "wouldn't it be amazing if we could take Grandpa to meet Steve Harvey? He always seems so happy when this show is on." Martha had initially dismissed the idea as impossible. Frank's condition had progressed to the point where unfamiliar environments often triggered confusion. The idea of traveling to Atlanta, being in a television studio with bright lights and crowds, seemed overwhelming rather than comforting. But Susan, their daughter, had been intrigued. As a registered nurse specializing in dementia care, Susan understood how Alzheimer's patients could sometimes be reached through familiar voices or comforting routines. If Frank found peace in Steve Harvey's presence on television, perhaps meeting Steve in person might create a moment of joy worth the challenges of the journey. The application process had been emotionally complex. How do you explain that one member of your team has a progressive neurological disease that affects memory and communication unpredictably? Susan had written a letter to the Family Feud producers that was equal parts medical explanation and love story, describing Frank's career as a longshoreman, his devotion to family, and how Alzheimer's had changed him. But most importantly, Susan had written about Martha, about a woman who had never missed a morning of making coffee for her husband, who still set 2 places at their table, even though Frank often forgot to eat, who continued to tell him about their children's lives, even though he could no longer follow the connections between names and faces. "My mother loves my father exactly as he is today," Susan had written, not as he was before Alzheimer's, but as the man who sits across from her at breakfast every morning and sometimes smiles when she places that blue coffee mug in his hands. The producers had been moved by Susan's letter and by the subsequent phone conversations that revealed a family dealing with Alzheimer's with remarkable grace, love, and determination to find joy in small moments. They had made special accommodations for Frank's condition, arranging for medical personnel to be available during taping and creating a quiet space where he could rest if the studio environment became overwhelming. The preparation for Family Feud had been both challenging and therapeutic for the Williams family. Frank's participation was necessarily limited. His memory and communication abilities made studying survey answers impossible, but the anticipation had given Martha a sense of purpose that had been missing from their routine of medical management. During practice sessions, Martha's answers reflected the wisdom of someone who had learned to find meaning in smallest gestures. When asked what makes people happy, Martha would answer, seeing someone you love smile. When posed questions about what couples do together, Martha would respond, share the morning coffee, or sit quietly and just be present. The flight to Atlanta had been Frank's first airplane trip since his diagnosis, requiring careful planning for his comfort and safety. Martha had packed familiar items, his favorite blanket, photographs, the small wooden cross he carried, despite no longer remembering the prayers it once reminded him to say. But remarkably, Frank had seemed to enjoy the flight, something about the airplane engines and being surrounded by family creating peace that surprised everyone. The Family Feud production team had been briefed extensively about Frank's condition and had made accommodations to ensure his participation would be comfortable and dignified. They had been warned that his responses might be delayed or confused, that he might become agitated in unfamiliar environments. But they had also been told that Frank Williams had been a good man his entire life, that his family loved him deeply, and that this appearance represented what might be their last opportunity to create a joyful memory together. Steve Harvey's pre-show meeting with the Williams family was unlike any contestant interaction he had experienced. Instead of typical nervous excitement, Steve found himself with people who seemed to understand they were participating in something sacred, a final gift of love for someone whose ability to receive such gifts was gradually disappearing. "Mrs. Williams," Steve said, approaching Martha with obvious respect for the elderly woman whose quiet strength was immediately apparent. "I understand your husband Frank has been watching the show for years. How long have you been married?" "Eindaked Eve Tuo." Martha's face lit up with the same radiance that had captivated Frank Williams when they first met at a church social in 1979. 42 years next month, she said with obvious pride. "Frank used to say that watching your show was like having a friend visit every afternoon. He would laugh at your reactions and try to guess the answers before the contestants did." Steve looked over at Frank, who was sitting quietly in a wheelchair with a blanket across his lap, his eyes focused on something that only he could see. There was still handsomeness in his weathered features, still dignity in his posture, despite the disease that was gradually taking him away from his family. "And how is Frank doing these days?" Steve asked gently, understanding from the family's preliminary conversations that this was a man living with Alzheimer's disease. Martha's voice remained steady, but her eyes filled with tears. "Frank has good days and challenging days. But every morning, he still accepts the coffee I make for him, and sometimes when I sit across from him at breakfast, I see the man I married. The disease might be taking his memories, but it hasn't taken his capacity to be loved, or his ability to find comfort in familiar routines." Susan stepped forward to add context. "Dad doesn't always remember who we are anymore, but he still responds to kindness, to gentle voices, to people who treat him with dignity. We're hoping that being here, meeting you, might reach him in ways that words no longer can." Steve was profoundly moved by the family's love and by Martha's obvious devotion to a man who could no longer fully reciprocate the emotional connection they had once shared. This wasn't just about appearing on a game show. This was about honoring a marriage that had transcended the traditional vows of in sickness and in health, and entered territory where love was measured not by recognition or gratitude, but by the simple commitment to continue showing up, day after day, for someone who might not remember that you had been there the day before. The opposing family, the Rodriguez clan from Phoenix, had initially approached the competition with enthusiasm, But when they learned about Frank's condition and witnessed the Williams family's gentle care for their patriarch, their competitive spirit transformed into something more supportive and respectful. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about participating in something that honored the deepest commitment that human beings can make to each other. When Steve Harvey took the stage with his characteristic energy, the studio buzzed with anticipation, but there was an undercurrent of reverence, a recognition that this episode would be special because of the quiet courage of the elderly woman standing at the contestants' podium, flanked by family members, who understood that they were creating what might be their last shared memory with the man who had been the center of their world for 42 years. The family introductions revealed the unique nature of the Williams team, and Steve learned about Frank's 4 decades as a longshoreman, about his reputation as a man who could fix anything and who never said no when neighbors needed help. He heard about Martha's career as an elementary school teacher, about their 3 children who had all remained in Georgia to be close to their parents, about grandchildren who spent afternoons reading to Grandpa Frank even when he couldn't follow the stories. "Mrs. Williams," Steve said during the introductions, 42 years of marriage. What's the secret to a love that lasts that long? Martha looked at Frank, who was sitting peacefully nearby with Emma holding his hand, and her response carried the wisdom of someone who had learned that love isn't always about passion or romance or even mutual recognition. Sometimes it's simply about choosing, every single day, to be present for another person's journey, whatever that journey might bring. "The secret," she said, her voice steady despite her emotion, "is understanding that love isn't just about the good times. It's about sitting with someone in the difficult times. It's about making coffee every morning even when the person you're making it for might not remember that you made it yesterday. It's about finding ways to say, 'I love you' that don't require words or memory or even recognition." She paused, looking directly at Frank, whose attention seemed focused somewhere beyond the studio lights. "Frank might not remember our wedding day, or our children's births, or the 1,000 little moments that made up our life together. But every morning when I put that coffee mug in his hands, when he takes that first sip and sometimes looks at me with those eyes, I fell in love with 43 years ago. I know that love doesn't live in memory. Love lives in the present moment, in the choice to show up, in the commitment to care for someone, simply because caring is what love looks like." The studio fell completely quiet. This wasn't the typical light-hearted banter that characterized Family Feud introductions. This was something profound, something that connected everyone present to their own experiences of love, commitment, and the fear of losing the people who matter most. The game began with Martha at the center podium for the face-off. The question was simple: name something people do every morning. Martha buzzed in confidently and answered, "Make coffee for someone they love." It was the number 1 answer on the board, and the Williams family chose to play. As the round continued, each family member's answers reflected their deep understanding of daily routines, small gestures, and the importance of consistency in creating comfort and stability. Susan answered, "Check on family members," which was revealed as the number 3 response. Michael said, "Say good morning," earning the number 5 spot. Emma's answer of "be grateful for another day" wasn't on the board, but it drew sustained applause from the studio audience. When it was time for the second round, Martha was again at the podium. The category was Name Something Married Couples Share, and Steve approached her with obvious respect for the woman who had just shared such profound wisdom about the nature of lasting love. "Mrs. Williams, name something married couples share." Martha looked at Frank, who seemed momentarily more alert, perhaps responding to the familiar voice and energy that had comforted him during countless afternoons of watching Family Feud at home. When she answered, her voice carried the certainty of someone speaking from lived experience. "Their hopes for tomorrow," she said simply. The answer wasn't on the board. The survey had focused on more tangible things, like household chores, financial responsibilities, and daily routines. But something about Martha's response, the way she had looked at Frank when she said it, and the profound truth it contained about what marriage really means when tested by circumstances beyond anyone's control, created a moment that transcended typical game show entertainment. Steve set his microphone down and walked directly to Martha, his usual quick wit replaced by the recognition that he was in the presence of something extraordinary. "Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice filled with respect. "That might not be on the board, but that's the most beautiful answer about marriage I've ever heard on this show." The studio audience began to applaud, but Steve raised his hand for quiet. "You know what you just taught all of us? You taught us that sharing hopes for tomorrow, even when tomorrow is uncertain, even when one person might not remember what yesterday brought, even when the future looks nothing like what you planned, that's what real marriage looks like. That's what real love does." Steve turned to address Frank directly, speaking slowly and clearly in case he was able to follow the conversation. "Mr. Frank, Ace, I want you to know that you have an extraordinary wife who has been taking care of you with more love and devotion than most people ever experience in a lifetime. And I want you to know that everyone in this studio respects and honors what you and Martha have built together." Frank looked up at Steve with an expression that seemed more focused than it had been since they arrived at the studio. For just a moment, something passed across his features that looked like recognition, like understanding, like the man he had been before Alzheimer's began building walls around his consciousness. The game continued, but it had been transformed into something deeper than entertainment. During the third round, when the category was "Name something that brings people comfort," Martha answered, "Familiar routines shared with people you love." And even though it wasn't on the board, Steve announced that it should have been. But it was during the fourth round that the moment everyone would remember forever finally arrived. The category was "Name something couples do together every day," and after family members had provided answers like eat meals, watch television, and talk about their day, it was Martha's turn. Steve walked over to Martha's position at the podium, microphone in hand, and addressed the woman who had spent the past hour demonstrating what unconditional love looks like when tested by circumstances that would challenge the strongest relationships. "Mrs. Williams, name something couples do together every day." Martha looked at Frank, who was holding Emma's hand, and seemed to be listening to the familiar rhythm of the game that had been part of their afternoon routine for years. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the studio with the kind of certainty that comes from absolute truth born of daily experience. "Share their tomorrow's hopes," she said, unconsciously echoing her earlier answer, but adding a dimension that revealed everything about how she approached each new day with Frank. Steve stopped moving entirely, and the studio fell silent as everyone processed what they had just heard, not just the words, but the meaning behind them, the daily reality they represented, the love story they revealed. "Mrs. Williams," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "what you just said, that's not just an answer about what couples do together. That's a window into the most beautiful love story I've ever encountered." He set his microphone down and walked to where Martha stood, positioning himself where both she and Frank could see him clearly. "You know what you've been doing for 42 years, and what you're still doing every single day? You've been keeping tomorrow's hopes alive for both of you. Even when Frank can't remember yesterday, even when today is confusing for him, you wake up every morning and share your hopes for tomorrow through that cup of coffee, through your presence, through your commitment to love him exactly as he is right now." Steve turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying the weight of recognition for something sacred. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what real love looks like. Not the movie's love, not the romance novel love, not the love that only exists when everything is perfect and easy. This is the love that shows up every single morning to make coffee for someone who might not remember that you made it yesterday. This is the love that keeps sharing tomorrow's hopes, even when tomorrow might not bring the miracle we're praying for." He walked back to Martha and took her hands in his, speaking directly to her with profound respect. "Mrs. Williams, I want you to have something." Steve began removing his suit jacket, the same navy blue jacket that had become part of his television persona, as he draped it around Martha's shoulders. His voice carried the reverence of someone recognizing true heroism. "This jacket has been with me through every episode I've hosted, through celebrations and heartbreaks, through all kinds of family stories. But it's never touched someone who has shown me what love really means when everything else falls away. You keep that jacket, and whenever you need to remember how extraordinary you are, how beautiful your love story is, you remember that a whole television studio learned something about commitment and devotion from watching you love your husband." Martha looked down at the jacket, then at Frank, then at Steve with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said simply. "Frank was always my hero. It means everything to know that people can see he still is." Steve wasn't finished. He walked over to Frank's wheelchair and knelt down beside it, speaking directly to the man who had once been the center of this family's world, and who remained, in different ways, their reason for coming together every day. "Mr. Frank," Steve said gently, "I don't know how much you understand about what's happening right now, but I want you to know that you have a family who loves you more than words can express, and a wife who has shown all of us what it means to love someone with your whole heart, every single day, no matter what." Frank looked at Steve with an expression that seemed clearer than it had been all day. Slowly, with obvious effort, he lifted his hand towards Steve's face. Steve took Frank's hand in both of his own, and for a moment, the entire studio witnessed something indescribable. A connection between two men who had never met, but who recognized something essential in each other. "Thank you," Frank said, the words slow and careful, but unmistakably sincere, "for being kind to my Martha." The studio erupted in applause that lasted several minutes, but it wasn't celebration. It was recognition, gratitude, and honor for two people who had shown them what marriage looks like when tested by the cruelest circumstances imaginable. The episode aired 6 weeks later and became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's history. But more than that, it sparked a national conversation about Alzheimer's care, the challenges facing families dealing with dementia, and the extraordinary strength required to love someone through the gradual loss of everything that once defined them. The response from viewers was unprecedented. Families caring for loved ones with Alzheimer's wrote to share their own stories of small daily rituals that maintained connection across the growing distance created by the disease. Caregivers found comfort in seeing their experiences reflected with dignity and respect. Medical professionals praised the show for presenting dementia care as an expression of love rather than a burden. Frank Williams passed away peacefully 8 months after the Family Feud episode aired, holding Martha's hand in the same bedroom where she had brought him coffee every morning for 40 years. At his memorial service, over 400 people gathered to honor a man who had touched their lives through his kindness, work ethic, and role as husband to a woman who had shown them what "till death do us part" really means. Steve spoke at the memorial service, wearing the navy blue jacket that Martha had returned with a note. "Frank wanted you to have this back, with his thanks for treating our love story with such respect. Martha and Frank Williams taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life," Steve told the gathered mourners. "They taught me that love isn't just about the good times, the easy times, the times when everything makes sense. Love is about making coffee every morning for someone who might not remember that you made it yesterday. Love is about sharing hopes for tomorrow, even when tomorrow is uncertain. Love is about showing up, day after day, not because you have to, but because that's what love does." The Martha Williams Alzheimer's Care Fund continues to this day, providing support for families dealing with dementia and funding research into better treatments and potential cures. But perhaps more importantly, Martha's story continues to inspire families facing similar challenges to find meaning in small daily acts of care, and to understand that love doesn't require memory, it only requires presence. Because sometimes love really isn't about remembering. Sometimes it's about refusing to forget that every morning is a gift, every shared moment is precious, and every cup of coffee made with love is a prayer, a promise, and a testament to the truth that some things are stronger than any disease that tries to tear them apart. Martha Williams proved that the sunrise keepers, the people who wake up every morning committed to creating light in someone else's darkness, are the true heroes of every love story. And sometimes, the most beautiful endings aren't about happily ever after, they're about loving someone completely, right up until the very last cup of coffee, right up until the final sunrise, right up until love is all that remains.